First question we always deal with there is, okay, that was malt.
Actually, no, it's good.
What the hell is malt? Well, there's a lot of varieties of grass in the world. One very famous variety of grass. We're not going there. One very famous variety of grass. Many of us, myself included, push lawnmowers through most of the summer. One very famous form of grass is called wheat. One very famous form of grass is called barley. Barley and wheat grow very tall. They have a very strong central shaft. The seeds pop out on both sides of the shaft near the top. And the seeds that come off the barley plant are called? Barley, very good. Okay. How many of you were going to say malt? He screwed you out. Anyway, problem. In its natural raw format, barley, not real soluble. You crush it, you put it in hot water, not much happens. Real hard to make beer out of something that's essentially not soluble. So, thousands of years ago, some genius figured out that if you take these barley seeds and you put them in warm water, and you let them do what they will naturally do, which is sprout. When the seed sprouts, Mother Nature makes the inside of it, or the endosperm, soluble to feed, to be the food source for the developing little baby plant. Now, we clever little beer types come along and kiln dry the sprouting barley, killing the little baby plant, but now, when we crush the seeds, the starch will go into solution, and we can make beer.
Barley malt.
That process of germinating and then drying barley is called malting. And so anytime you hear the word malt used, it's referring to barley that's been put through that process. Now, if basically all we do is sprout it and dry it, what you make is called pale malt, and what you tasted is basically pale malt. Okay? If you crack it open, it's nice and white and fluffy on the inside. It's extremely fermentable, and it's the backbone of all beer recipes. Even a beer as dark as our Peg Leg Imperial Stout is about 85% pale malt in the recipe. If instead of just drying it, let's say, and there are other variables here, but this will give you a good idea. Let's say, okay, I was drying it at 220 for an hour and a half, but I'm going to now ramp that up to 475, and I'm going to do it for 20 minutes. All right, well, what's going to happen is the color's going to change, and the flavor profile is going to change. And there's lots of different variations on that theme where they adjust the temperature and the time and come up with different kinds of roasting, if you will, to finish the process. And over the centuries, these have all been very specified and given names. So when you look on the label of a bottle of beer and it says pale malt, crystal, Vienna, Munich, chocolate, etc., those are all different kinds of roasts. When you go back into the hospitality area, there's a little wooden rack next to our lab, which has got about, I want to say, 40 or 50 different vials of different malts. You can actually look at them and see the colors and the roasting right there. What a brewer does is that we take our base pale malt and then we add smaller volumes of these darker roasted grains to give us the overall color and the flavor profile of the beer that we want to brew. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So by the selection of the malts in the blend, we affect the overall color and the flavor profile. By the selection of the hops and the quantity of the hops, we affect the overall aroma and the bitterness level of the beer. Okay? Alcohol is determined by the amount of malt that you use to make a batch of beer. So, for example, in McHenry Lager, which is like 4.6, 4.7% alcohol by volume, I might use 75 pounds of malt to make a barrel of beer. In the Loose Cannon at 7.25% alcohol by volume, I might use 125 pounds of malt to make that same barrel of beer. In the Below Decks, at 10%, I might use 200 pounds of malt to make that same barrel of beer. All right, I mention this to you for two reasons. First off and foremost, the reason that we are trying to make, what we're trying to do with our Heavy Seas line of beers is just make beers that are richer, denser, and more complex in flavor profile than beers of a lesser stature, if you will. In order to do that, one of the things that we're doing is we're increasing the malt, which guarantees that there's going to be more richness and depth and complexity in the flavor profile. Unfortunately, what happens when you do that is you also raise the alcohol. And I say unfortunately because I love the flavor profile that I get in the Loose Cannon. If I could do that and do it at 4.5% alcohol by volume, I would do it in a heartbeat. It's just not possible. The only reason I say it is because, you know, it's nice to when you're having a couple of pints, you know, if you don't want to stop at 2, which you have to with the Loose Cannon. So, the other thing is that should underscore for you why you should expect to pay more for the higher ABV or alcohol beers as they go along, because it directly correlates to the cost of the raw materials that the brewer is using in the process. Does that all make sense? This area here is called the brew house. This is where everything's actually assembled. What we do here is that we crush the malt that goes through a mill, and then it's conveyed and drops into that silo right there that says GSI. In front of that, there's a sliding door. The brewer will open the sliding door, and the crushed malt will fall through a round wetting line, which will spray hot water as it's falling through, and then land in the bottom of the first vessel, which is called the mash mixer. The bottom of that vessel is like a slowly rotating boat propeller, which will then mix the crushed malt with hot water and create a uniform mash, which kind of looks sort of like it's like a soupy oatmeal. Once that starch has been completely broken down, the liquid portion of the mash is by now about 26% sugar by solution, which is about twice as sweet as Coca-Cola. The dominant sugar is maltose. Anybody here ever had a malted milk ball? You had maltose. By the time we've now gotten to this stage, if we've done our job right, between 85 and 90% of the dry weight of the malt has been liquefied and turned into what we want. So at this stage, we only want the liquid, we no longer need the solids. So we'll transfer the entire mash from the mash mixer to the lauter tun. The lauter tun is nothing more than a separator. It's a wider vessel, it has a dish bottom, drain outlets, about 6 inches above the drains, and entirely covering the entire bottom of the vessel is a fine mesh stainless steel screen. We will pump the mash on top of the screen. Now once it's there, it's like making a pot of coffee. The dome of this vessel has hot water sprayers. You fire that up, you spray fresh hot water over the mash, it goes through the grain, it exits through the screens, solids are trapped above the screens, and the sweet liquid is allowed to flow out of the lauter tun slowly over to the brew kettle. We continue to wash the sugar out of the mash, and hopefully by the time we run out of sugar over here, it's about the time the kettle's full, unless we screw up. And now the liquid is ready to be boiled. At this stage, the liquid is called wort. We'll typically boil it for about 90 minutes. At this point, we're finished with the solids. They're conveyed outside. We have a large hopper outside. I have a cattle farmer who picks up the spent grain. We don't have to pay to have our waste removed, and we get a couple of boxes of steaks a couple times a year. It works out pretty good. The wort is boiled for 90 minutes. During the early part of the boil, we will add hops for bittering. Towards the end of the boil, we will add some hops for flavor and aroma. And then once the boil is completed, we will pump the wort out of the kettle through this thing below me, which sort of looks like a stainless steel honeycomb. It's called a plate frame heat exchanger. This will flash cool it from boiling to approximately 62 Fahrenheit if we're making ale, or 52 Fahrenheit if we're making lager. Boom. And then we'll hook up via hose and fill one of these fermenters that you see on both sides of the heater. Each one of these tanks represents approximately 1,400 cases of beer. This is called a hop bag. It's a big sort of stainless steel bucket with a porous bottom. We will fill this with the whole flower hops I showed you earlier. And then what we'll do is when the hot wort comes out of the kettle, before it's allowed to flash cool, we'll put another loop in there, and we'll force the hot wort to go through this basket of hop flowers and extract aromatics, and then flash cool, and then go into the fermenter. Sometimes we decide we still want additional hop aroma and flavor in the beer, even after doing this. And then we do a process called dry hopping, which is where you add hops to the beer post-fermentation when it's already cold for an additional 9 to 10 days of exposure to extract pure aromatics and pure flavor. Loose cannon is called hop cube ale. It's hopped in the kettle, in the hop bag, and then dry hopped 3 times. And it's hopped at a volume of 3 pounds of hops per barrel. To give you a bearing on that, anybody seen the commercials for Sam Adams lately where they're so proud of their 1 pound of hops per barrel for their Boston lager? Do I need to say anything else? So there's a reason we call it hop cube.